Well, Washington is waking up to a rather beautiful day, the first in a number of days, a long time coming, bright sunshine here, and also people waking up to the prospect of a younger, more diverse Congress. Washington waking up to headlines such as these here. What have I got? I've got the Washington Times with me here. Democrats flip House, GOP holds the Senate. That is the front cover of the Washington Times. I have here as well the Washington Post. There you go. Democrats claim the House. Of course, they didn't have full results at the time those newspapers went to press. But as you can see, it is the front page story. Obviously, it is a huge story. 114 people cast their ballots in these midterms. That's markedly more than in the midterms 4 years ago. Well, to talk us through these developments, I'm joined by Charles Kolb, who is a former domestic policy advisor to President George Bush Sr., and you also served in the Reagan administration. I want to start by asking you, we're hearing from both sides rather celebratory tone. And I'm just wondering, who do you think has more cause to be celebrating this morning?
Well, it's almost evenly divided. Republicans, of course, will keep the Supreme Court. They've kept the Senate. They have the White House. But I think it's a real problem for them that the House of Representatives has switched. This is going to mean 2 years of blockage for Trump's agenda, lots of investigations into his personal and professional business affairs. So it's, I guess the Democrats have a little bit more to celebrate. But the problem for the Democrats is they're also a divided party, split between progressives on the left, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren in the Senate, and what I'd call the Clinton centrists. So it's not clear what the Democrats' agenda is going to be in the House.
These elections very much setting the scene, aren't they, for the 2020 presidential race? And as you say, the Democrats are divided between these two camps that you've just described. Do you see things more clearly now in terms of who's going to lead the party? Do the results of the midterms in any way change your forecast as to who is going to lead that divided party into the presidential race?
That's an excellent question, and I think, frankly, the answer is not clear at this point. You have a large number of new elected representatives in the House, a number of women from suburban areas, and it's not clear whether these new Democrats coming into this building behind us are going to be centrist or progressive. I think it's going to be mixed. Now, what this means in terms of 2020 is it's not clear who the front runner is going to be for the Democrats. They pushed very strongly 3 celebrity candidates, 2 governorships, Georgia and Florida, and also a Senate seat in Texas. All 3 of those progressive Democratic candidates lost. So if you look into the crystal ball for the future, is it going to be a retread like Joe Biden, or is it going to be a progressive again like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren? If it's someone like Biden or Sanders, they're relatively old. They're in their mid-70s. So the Democrats, the good news is they grew their bench, they expanded it. And, of course, when Obama left office, the Democrats were at a very low point. They didn't have the Senate, they didn't have the House. They lost roughly 1,000 elected state and local people. Now the pendulum has started to come back. They're broadening, they're deepening their base, but it's not yet clear who the leadership is going to go to. I don't think it's going to be a Nancy Pelosi, for example.
We were talking quite a lot yesterday when we were covering the midterm elections about the economy, how the economy here in the United States is doing incredibly well. The latest jobs report, extremely positive. Are you confident that heading into 2020, the U.S. economy is going to manage that kind of progress, those positive figures, or do you think it's going to run out of steam? And if it does, is that going to change the outcome of 2020?
I'm not at all confident that the current vibrancy, the strength of the economy is going to continue. Now, why is it so strong now? I think for a number of reasons. Of course, there was Trump's tax cut, which boosted the economy, put more money in the hands of people. His regulatory reforms, I think, have helped that. But bear in mind the fact that for basically 10 years, thanks to the Federal Reserve, our central bank, the cost of money has been very, very cheap. Okay, that's highly unusual. And now the Federal Reserve is starting to raise interest rates again. That's going to provide headwinds to the economy. So I think we're seeing the high point right now, and it wouldn't surprise me to see a recession once higher interest rates kick in. And of course, Trump now is not going to be able to get a tax bill through the Congress. He talked a little bit briefly about lowering taxes for the middle class in another tax bill, but I just don't see that getting through a divided Congress.
I mean, if the midterms had only been about the economy, it would have been a no-brainer, wouldn't it? I mean, the Republicans would have won the House and the Senate, wouldn't they?
Well, I'm not so sure about that. Yes, the people do vote the economy, but if you look at the polling, the polling before the election, healthcare was the dominant issue. Then it was immigration. Then it was the economy. So on the issue of healthcare, I guess the Democrats could propose a Medicare for all approach. That's not going to get through the Senate, and if it did, it would be vetoed by the president. So I think the only two areas that I can identify where we're likely to see progress is on immigration, oddly enough. They might go back and try and get another bill, and then possibly on infrastructure. Those are two areas where I think Republicans and Democrats can come together. Usually I'm an optimist. I'd like to see these good economic times continue. But when you've had a 10-year run like this with zero interest rate policy basically for 10 years, that can't continue. And once that stops, it's kind of like, I hate to use this analogy, but once you take the cocaine away, you have withdrawal symptoms. So we'll see. But I'm not optimistic that the good times that we see right now are going to be there in 2020. That will have very severe implications for Trump if he chooses to run again. But again, the Democrats have to figure out what's going to unite them. They can't just run an anti-Trump agenda. That's not going to get them very far.
The rhetoric on the campaign trail was hostile, toxic. It was pretty unpleasant a lot of the time. Are you confident that in the next 2 years before the 2020 presidential elections, we're going to see matters improve? Is this nation going to manage to heal some of those wounds, some of those divides, or do you just see those gulfs getting wider?
I don't think it's going to get any better. I think it's going to stay the same or possibly get wider. I can't imagine that Donald Trump is going to change his modus operandi and moderate his rhetoric. That's not who he is personally. But quite frankly, I worked for two Republican presidents, Reagan and H.W. Bush Sr. I actually don't think Donald Trump is the heart of the Republican Party. Now, there are a number of Republicans who won last night because he campaigned in their districts, but Americans, I think, in their heart of hearts, don't appreciate the type of polarization and antagonism that we've seen. I just don't think it's going to change yet. I think we're going to have to await new leadership before that changes.
But what you have to credit Mr. Trump for is this mobilization. That is a large part, isn't it, thanks to him and his presence, getting those sorts of numbers out to the polls in a midterm election. Is that all down to Donald Trump?
Well, I think certainly on the Republican side that's due to Donald Trump, but you also saw a parallel increase in midterm voting on the Democratic side. If I were advising the Republicans, I would be very concerned about what's happening to suburban women. So a lot of those Democrats who won House seats won in areas where they took the suburbs. You saw that particularly in Texas last night, traditionally a very red state, but around Houston and other major cities there, you're beginning to see a Democratic comeback. And I think in part it's because Trump's rhetoric does not appeal to those middle-class suburban, particularly white women. So Republicans are going to have to figure out how to change their rhetoric, because I think it's going to be very difficult for Trump in 2020 to recreate that swath where he won through northwestern Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. That's what really put him over the edge. He's helped now by the fact that the Republicans have kept Florida. They picked up a Senate seat. They kept the governorship in Republican hands. So that's going to be helpful. But he'll need to recreate that swath through the Midwest, and that's going to be difficult to do.
All right, well, thank you so much for speaking to us. Charles Kolb, former domestic policy advisor to President George Bush Sr. Thank you very much indeed. So there we have it, the United States waking up to a different political landscape this morning, but the scene is set very much now for the 2020 presidential race. Back to you in Paris.